I'm Jason Webb, and this is Over Quota, where I interview founders, CEOs, sales leaders, and top enterprise software salespeople about the keys to consistently exceeding sales expectations. Now, my goal for this is to give listeners something that's beyond what they might get from traditional sales and training by interviewing real people about how they've actually driven real results consistently over time. So today's guest is a perfect guest to start off with. His name is Marty Petraitis. He's had an expansive sales experience and from a variety of different ways. And what I mean by that is that not only has he led sales at publicly traded companies, but he's also led sales at, I believe, 3 startup companies. And then he's also had something in the middle where you would call them transitional companies, where he needed to sort of really wrap his arms around the organization and the sales to improve it and get it to a certain point. And I'd say one of his biggest accomplishments, we can talk to him about that in a second, is building a company, global sales, I should say, from 0 to 210 million in just about 5 years, I believe, is what I think I read. But we'll make sure that we get some clarification from him. Marty, welcome to the Over Quota podcast.
Thank you, Jay.
So talk to me about that. Do I have that right? From 0 to 210 million over a 5-year period of time. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. That was with an automation company. That growth was 50% organic and 50% through acquisition. But that 50% organic through multiple acquisitions certainly drove a need to rapidly integrate many companies under one sales umbrella, and have those processes in place to do that, and also move up the value chain from $25,000, $30,000 ASPs to tens of millions ASPs. So what we really did is crawled up the value chain very, very, very quickly in that endeavor.
Okay, fantastic. And that's why I wanted to start there, just to sort of set the stage and give people a sense of the scope of your experience. So let's just start there. Since this podcast, again, is to really understand what this differentiates the people who have consistently exceeded their numbers and exceeded their quotas, I wanted to start with, at a very high level, in your opinion, and obviously through all those acquisitions and the sales teams that you've run, I'm sure you have some really good experience on this, is what do the best salespeople do differently that others should be modeling?
Great question. I'm going to assume 2 things before I answer that question. One is that you know the profile that you have. You know what your sales model is. You understand the buying model. You have all the right to change your selling model. You have no right to change your buying model. That's determined by the market. So you know what you're doing. So the world I play in is high value enterprise sales. So in that role of high value enterprise sales, when I start to look at salespeople that I know that can contribute, I look at several different factors. But is there a magic key? I think of one thing that I always look at is, sure, you can give me a resume and I can be talking to them, and yes, they make their numbers. But something that I've found that is very, very, very key, very typical in the profile of those that make their numbers, and it's simple, but it's something that is very, very consistent, and that is, those that make their numbers balance their sales activities among three areas: closing, advancing the sales, and prospecting. And while that's simply said, one of the things I look at is how well does a salesperson manage their time, particularly in an enterprise sales endeavor. Complex sales require a lot of different work, both externally and internally, and you got to be careful that your activities are associated with sales. You can get sucked into a myriad of different things that aren't falling in those 3 categories. One of the things I always look at and have the conversation is really, really good A players are extremely disciplined in their time. And as examples, I always reserve Thursday afternoons for making prospect calls, and nobody can touch that time. Things of that sort are things that I look at. But that one is very, very, very consistent. Every A player that I've worked with has that skill set behind them, and they really do manage that.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned there were two others as well. You said you manage the time.
So the three things that they do is prospecting, advancing the sales, and closing.
Mm-hmm.
B players like to close and advance, but they worry about their pipeline. So the good guys really do keep those three in balance. And when I see the difference between an A player and a B player, typically it's that I'm not prospecting, I'm not looking, I'm not focusing on my pipeline. Those that do it well, and especially with complex sales, you gotta be looking at what are you positioning 2-3 quarters out. If your sales cycles are 6 months, you got to be doing that. And the real good salespeople address those three, but really have a discipline on prospecting.
Got it. Okay. And if they don't, let's say, for instance, you mentioned how I think 50% of that 210 million came through acquisition. And as you were evaluating those organizations and those sales teams, obviously, is it safe to assume that you were inheriting, you weren't inheriting all A players, correct?
Correct.
And so with that, in knowing with what you just said, is there a way to enable those behaviors of managing your activity and managing your time and coaching folks through that? Or is it something that either they have and they don't have, and if they don't have, then they're not going to be successful?
So, good question. There's a couple of things going on there. One of the things that I'm a big believer in is making establishing a sales culture. And the sales culture is based on accountability and making it very, very visible on who are the players in the sales team and where do they rank. And the A players are very visible, the B players are visible, and the C players are visible. The C players are very visible, and they know that they're not a B player or an A player. What I look for there then in the C's or B players, I look for them is, do they have both the aptitude and the desire to be better? Many times the C players do not have that desire to be better. What I mean by that, you'll hear excuses, you'll hear things on the reasons why they can't. The B players tend to be, the potentials of the B players going to the A players, they tend to be coachable and understand, looking for what is it that I am not doing that I need to do, and emulate the A players. So one of the things that I always like to do is to demonstrate why people are winning, what are they doing in winning, so they can emulate that and coach up to those skills.
That makes sense. And do you have any sort of so the people that you did inherit, let's just say, and then some of those C and B players, were you able to bring a C player into A player capacity, or is it just it just didn't happen? It just doesn't happen because they don't.
In my 20 plus years with many sales folks, there may have been one that I have done, but really it comes down to holding the mirror up in front of them and asking them, do you have sales DNA, and do you have the sales DNA to pull it off? Sales DNA is the most important part. Skills can be trained, but you have to have that sales DNA. What is sales DNA? It's, being comfortable with talking with money. Doesn't need approval. In sales, you got to have tough discussions, and you're not there to be the guy most liked. You're there to be the person that's going to address the customer's outcome and develop your trust and rapport with that. And there's a difference between managing a customer's outcome versus the customer likes me. And the real good A players have an insatiable part of their DNA that says, I am here to help your outcome. You may not like what I'm saying. And that's one of the attributes that I look for: the need to be liked, the need for approval. That's a very important sales DNA piece that I think is needed, particularly in the enterprise sales, in which you're trying to get that trust and rapport, that all those buzzwords of I am the trusted advisor and whatnot. But that really means that I'm going to have the ability to have tough conversations, or difficult conversations, or conversations that make my prospect uncomfortable, but allowing them to see that this is an uncomfortable conversation because I'm looking at their outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Those skill sets are A players usually have that in spades.
Is there such a, so you mentioned, you're talking about DNA, and we're talking about within that seems to me like a methodology of really, or a way of thinking where you're in control of the sales process and not necessarily in control of the best liked contest, so to speak.
Right.
Wrapped around all that though, where do you put sales process, right? Like, I guess, and even maybe if we had a pie chart and we said, okay, we got sales DNA, you've got sales process, and maybe we've even got like a particular methodology about it. Like, talk to me about where, talk to me about how that pie is split in your mind.
Okay. Process is important, and process is always maturing. So process is important, process is always maturing. I could have a great process, but I don't have the sales DNA for people to execute it. It's not going to happen because sales is a personal to personal endeavor. The classic, people buy emotionally and they rationalize by price and technology, or price and logic, but they buy emotionally. And so the sales DNA is very, very important in that element. Now you could go and bring the process in. The processes are guidelines. And there's a big difference between process, style, and method. I believe in a sales group of sales reps that is very diversified and eclectic in its styles. In coaching, I don't coach style, I coach outcomes. And I think that's the important part, and let the style, the DNA and the style work best. Coach to the positive stuff, coach to the strengths of the sales folks, right? And it's not necessarily it's not a style issue, it's to the strengths issue. So, are they comfortable in discussing money? Do they handle rejection well? What are their supporting beliefs? What I mean by that is if one of the things when I'm interviewing a potential candidate, I'll ask them about something that they just recently bought, a big ticket item, and what process they went through in doing that. Because how they buy, they will project onto their client. So if you're a person that does, a lot of detailed discussion, and I look at all options and I wait and it takes me a long time to make a decision, well, you're probably going to agree with the customer. Of course, that's what they have to do. So those are the things I look at.
Right, because in that case, you're showing empathy with you're showing customer empathy, which doesn't necessarily align with good sales DNA.
Exactly, and it goes back to doesn't need approval, and can I have a challenging, can I have a difficult conversation with my client on this? Why are you waiting? What more information could you possibly want?
Right. That sounds like the way I talk to my kids. I have too much empathy for them sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm not the most.
We're all guilty of that.
Yeah, exactly. You meant one of the things you mentioned that that I want to ask about is you said how they handle objections, right? You want to find out how they handle objections. Talk to me about that. Like, what are some of the indicators that you hear when you're talking to a candidate, let's just say, that says, this person, the way that they handle objections does not align with this sales process or the outcome that I'm looking for here in this organization. And yes, and then this is a way there that, this person does handle objections well. And this is what I'm looking for. I'm curious about that.
Well, so style and coaching, let the salesperson's style reveal itself. But if there's objection, you want to peel that in many layers. Why? And handling objection is not about defending your position. It's more about understanding the motivation. And then through that, in that coaching styles, understanding that motivation reveals and usually comes to an end that says, we can fix that objection. And you bring that customer, pace, lead that customer through that dismantling of that objection such that you really come to a point is this really an objection? Or is this an emotional response to something? And you may find out that, so my father taught me something a long time ago, and he says, to find truth, there's always two reasons. The good reason and the real reason. You'll always be told the good reason. Find the real reason.
Interesting.
And I think that's actually a quote from Mark Twain. But don't hold me to that.
I won't quote you on that. Yeah.
Yeah. I stole it. So, but when you think about that, and that's what objection handling is okay, what's the real reason? I have a style. When he says, here's the objection. And because of my style, I'm very forward. I says, okay, I hear your objection. Now tell me the real reason. You tell me that reason. Now tell me the real reason. Those are techniques and styles. But again, it's how you coach to that. And are you able to go do that? Somebody who handles a rejection by, I have to defend my position. In my world of high ticket enterprise level sales, complex sales, in today's world, 11-1 vote in your favor means you have a tie. You have to get the 12-0 vote, and you have to address those objections in each one and really uncover what the real motivation is. And 9 times out of 10, it's a personal motivation that they're dealing with. When you're able to touch upon that, you now can address the objection.
One of the things that I like to do when I'm preparing candidates, especially candidates that aren't necessarily as seasoned, is I talk to them about the end of the interview. And I tell them that, oftentimes the interview doesn't necessarily start until, let's say Marty says, okay, Steve, do you have any questions for me? Right. And I say that because oftentimes, when you're going through a sales process, it really is, to your point, figuring out the why, right? Getting to that objection and getting the real, like you said, there's 2 truths, the real truth and I forget what you said, the stated truth or something.
Right.
Yeah. And
good reason
so,
and real reason. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And to ask those questions. So one of the pieces of advice that I always give towards the end of the interview is to have them say, based on this 30-minute conversation that we've had so far, do you have any concerns with my candidacy at this time, or something to that effect, right? And I always, especially when they're, and to your point, when you're talking about complex enterprise sales, these things matter, and process matters, and those types of things. Like when you're getting to the end of an interview with somebody, and somebody asks that or doesn't ask that, does that separate them in one way or another?
Oh, absolutely. Because I look at an interview as exactly the exact same model that they would have when they first meet a prospect. I'm the new prospect, show me your sales skills. And I'm looking at the 3 balances. Have they advanced the sale with me? As an interviewee, I'm interviewing them. I'm looking at them to advance the sale. And have they asked me questions to understand what I need to advance the sale to make it go forward?
Right.
So that's, it amazes me sometimes as when I meet candidates, particularly sales candidates, that almost forget, and maybe this is a little, almost forget that they're in sales.
Right.
It amazes me. It amazes me.
Yes. I have to remind them often, frankly, that, I don't want you to forget that, while you're interviewing, right? You're interviewing for a sales position, and, and the large part of the interview really is not necessarily the words that are coming out of your mouth necessarily, but how you're conducting yourself, because Marty wants to see in real time, you can walk through your sales process with Marty and tell him that this is what you do and this is the things you overcome and all the other stuff. But if you're not exhibiting those behaviors actually during the interview, then what you're saying doesn't really, add up with what he's seeing.
So I'm looking at them to ask me what kind of outcomes I need, in my sales. What are they looking for? What are my objectives? What are my outcomes? Yes, styles and process and all that is good, but I'm looking through that conversation. Are they advancing this opportunity with them? Are they advancing it with me? Do they understand if I have any objections? Do they understand what any of the blockers are? Do they understand what the next steps are? Do they understand, just like any other sales call? And again, I'll come back. If I give any advice to any candidate looking and talking to a sales leader and positioning and stuff, remember it's a sales call.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. What about as they're walking through their sales process? And what I know what I typically look for, because I feel like I know what folks like you are looking for, right? But but one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast is because A, I don't have all the answers. B, I know that whether you're a CEO or a vice president of sales, you might even, you have your own things, I guess, that you're looking for in the sales process that either work or won't work. What are you looking for as indicators to hear somebody say, yep, this person is going to fit within this system or organization or not?
Oh, a couple of things, because again, this may not, what I play in the enterprise world, the higher ticket item and whatnot. I look for the salesperson's ability to find the why among the organization. And particularly in the high tech world, you can get quickly distracted because a lot of people want to know what and how. But the innate ability of them to understand the why allows them to devise then their win strategy. They're going to buy for us because there's a business reason. And now what they're off doing, when they can understand the true business reason for their prospect, their customer, now what they need to do is to go off and find out who is responsible for that business and that business why and how it affects everybody. And then go through that. As I said, the 11-to-1 vote in your favor is a tie. Go through all 12 and understand that there's a result for each one of these people. And if we achieve this why, this is what it's going to do for you. This is what and how we're going to go do it. You separate those two. I look for salespeople who get that. And it's complex sales. It's the ability to really understand the why of their prospect and then transform that why individually to all those people. I also look for salespeople who are always, when they're selling, they always know that they forgot something. I look for that quality. I know I'm not covering something. What is it that I'm not covering? I'm very comfortable that this is moving forward, but there's something I'm not doing. I don't know what it is, and I'm going to go look for that. Those guys, those salespeople, ladies and gentlemen, usually are always the winners in there, and they're the ones that are always with the most predictable sales. Also,
is there a way to extract that information for the sales leaders who might be listening, and recruiters, frankly, for that matter? Is there a way to extract that information from the candidate? You mentioned, to me, when I heard you say that, I'm thinking, okay, somebody that is introspective, right? Somebody that is sort of, evaluating themselves in real time. How can you glean that in an interview if you're sitting there across from a salesperson?
Well, I mean, there's some very standard ones. Tell me about a big deal you thought you'd won and you didn't, and why. Those come out. I suspect that one of the things through the questioning with the candidate, asking them to go through their sales process and tell me how they know when they're confident that they have won this deal, and really get down to the details. If you're in the dentist chair, tell me why this deal is head on the block, 100, in your 99.9% column. Why and what have you done to cover that off? So I look for those kinds of responses.
Makes sense. Okay. You mentioned enterprise sales and complex sales a number of times. What if, I have a lot of candidates that are selling mid-market, right? They're selling to mid-market and they're smaller deals, and certainly they don't typically take as long. If I were to present you with a candidate for an enterprise sale, right, but yet a person hasn't quite gotten to that level within their sales career yet, are you open to that, or do they need to somehow figure out a way to at least start closing some enterprise deals within their own current company before they can even be considered for that?
Well, nobody's born an enterprise salesperson, so you got to get there somehow.
Right.
In my case here, it depends on the project I'm on. It depends on what my strategy is. Would I consider that? I would absolutely consider that if I've got a stack that I've a large enough sales group that I need to grow and move forward with. Now, can people move from a mid-market to enterprise and whatnot? The answer is absolutely yes. I look at desire and motivation. And oh, I have desire, I have motivation. I look at the activities that exhibit that desire and motivation. For instance, sales is working with other sales folks, teaming up, listening to that enterprise guy, working. How do you go do this? Help me. Good sales folks choose a vendor, choose a mentor, and try to align themselves with that mentor. That's a key thing. I ask, who's your mentor in sales? Where do you get your mentorship? Where do you get your safe mentorship? That usually exhibits to me that yes, there's that desire and motivation is there.
It's interesting. I actually just talked to somebody yesterday who said, a young guy, right? He's just getting wanted to be a business development representative at a software company. And one of the things that he mentioned is that he has a mentor, and he sought out a mentor really on with his organization. And he was talking to me about some things that were really forward thinking and more advanced than I would expect someone with his level of experience to know. And so I asked him, I said, you just mentioned you have a mentor, how much of what you just told me came from that mentor in terms of the advice that he's been giving you? He said, all of it, frankly, which, and I was really impressed with him for sure.
The impressive part of that, the impressive part of it is they reach out to find their mentor. A mentor is not assigned to them. They go out and find good sales folks, find their mentors, and go forward. That is a very, it doesn't have to be inside the company. Good sales folks go off and find their mentors.
Yeah. And just thinking of, we were talking about being introspective and what am I missing? And that's the quintessential example of somebody that's thinking, I'm missing something, right? There's got to be more. Let me go out and find somebody that knows more, that's walked in the shoes that I want to be in, and go and do that. So that's a really good indicator of future success. Speaking of future success, what about people who have struggled and have underperformed? Let's say most recently, right? Let's say they're coming to you and they've been with a company for a couple of years, and the story isn't that they're doing 150% of the number. The story is maybe they're doing 50% of the number, and so forth. Under what circumstances, if any, I guess, are you able to overlook that and really evaluate the person that's either on the phone with you or sitting across from you?
Well, I can't overlook it. In a leadership position, you're accountable, period, end of story. You're accountable. So that means that you have to sit down and you hold the mirror up in front of the person and says, look, here's where we are. Do you want to be a salesperson? It is as basic as that. It may sound hard. The style and what you deal with it is, where are the barriers here? In my experience, those that don't perform have reasons. Unfortunately or fortunately, sales is a profession, and you get paid by performance. It is no different than a professional athlete. You get paid by performance. That is the game, and that's what you're signing up to do. If that is an issue, then maybe you're not a salesperson. You get paid for performance. End of story.
Let me ask you this, because I was talking again. That's what's interesting about doing this is, I'm always talking to candidates and sales leaders on a regular basis. And I was talking to a salesperson yesterday who told me that the compelling reason for him to start looking for another opportunity is because he did really well his first year. He had something like 400 accounts. It got quickly whittled down over the next couple of years to 80 accounts. I can see you smiling because you know where I'm going with this. Quickly whittled down to 80 accounts, yet his quota went up. And
yes, yeah. I hear this all the time. Yeah.
Right. So talk to me. All right. I guess I'll just leave it there then. I'll leave it open.
Yeah, it's the classic. I did real well. They cut my quota in half. The management cut my territory in half and doubled my quota.
Yes.
I'll call that sales leadership mismanagement. That is it. And I hear it 1,000 times. That is sales management, not managing sales, or I even say sales strategy. As a sales leader, you need to understand the business. You need to do the hard work of understanding the business that's out there, the opportunities that are out there, sizing your sales force to go after that business. And if I give a salesperson an unattainable goal and they know it, I've done them no service. I've done myself no service. I've got to be able to give them an attainable goal based stretch goal, absolutely stretch goal. Part of my job is to show that there's a line to get it, not a hope and a prayer to get it. I think that's in my world, in my view, and that's sales mismanagement. And I use a statement: shouting at the scoreboard does not change the score. It's the plays you run on the field that change it. If you're going to give somebody double their quota, have you really done all of the analysis that it takes to close a deal and really modeled that sales activity? Doubling your quota, cutting your territory in half tells me that I don't know what I need to do, but my manager says I've got to sell more. So this is how I'm going to sell more. I see that as sales mismanagement.
So a couple of questions that I have for that.
That makes sense?
It does. It makes a lot of sense. The first question I have is going back to that person who essentially this was the case in talking about, and that's sort of why I asked that question about, under what circumstances, would you be understanding? If somebody, if you know that that's the case, that it was sales mismanagement, and the salesperson individually was put in a position where they weren't necessarily put in a position to succeed, and frankly, almost fail. Then how does that, how I guess from your perspective, do you know the real truth, right? Like what's really going on, right? And how, from a salesperson's perspective, if he or she is sitting across from you, are they able to convey that in a way confidently to as opposed to lying, frankly?
I think I get the question.
Yeah.
Well, the question I'd ask them is, if you were to put yourself in your management shoes, mm-hmm. How would you go off and set a quota for a salesperson? How would you go do your bottom-up, top-down analysis? How would you go look at your sales cycle? How would you go look at the time it takes to sell that? How would you do a capacity model in your head on this is what I can achieve? Mm-hmm. Right? I would ask that person that. So, they double my quota and cut my territory in half. I can't win anymore. Mm-hmm. Time out. All right. Have you done the analysis of your capacity model? What is it that you need to do to go do that? All right. And if it shows that, I've doubled my capacity. My average sales cycle is 6 months. I now have a $15 million quota. My average selling price is $2 million. I divide that by there. I says, this tells me that there are, the capacity isn't there, and I need this kind of a pipeline. Here's where we are in that pipeline. That's not achievable. All right. And so I would have that conversation back with management. And again, it comes back to management has a responsibility to the salesperson. The salesperson has a responsibility back up to management. Management has to provide stretch attainable goals. If it's not an attainable goal, nobody's going to be motivated to do that. All right. If there's an issue with that goal, salesperson has to come back and says, I've done my capacity plan. Here's how I look at the world and how I can go do that. Now you're business partners in the sales process. All right. So that's how I would treat it. What did you have that, or is it just one of those? I'm complaining because now it's too hard for me to do over quote. Go over my quota. So I want to go find a new opportunity. I'd say what is it that you did to do your capacity model to see if you were able to achieve that or not?
So when the individual, you're saying that not only did they do their due diligence, their own capacity model on their own, but you're saying that they should take the next, or are you saying that they should?
I'm saying they should take the next step
and take it to the manager.
Take it to the managers.
Right.
Tell me what's wrong with this.
Got it. Wow, that's great advice. Okay. So let me ask you this then. From a sales management perspective, how do you go about putting together a sales forecast? This is actually something that the individual who you and I both know mentioned to me as we were just talking. We were meeting for coffee. He was talking about how people put together their sales forecast. But my question is based on what you just said is that if the board has a certain expectation for revenue, and you're the operator, and you got the boots on the ground, so to speak, and what's realistic, and what board might be setting might not necessarily be realistic. How do you go about setting that forecast and then setting the quotas so that you're not setting your salespeople up for quota, even if it's not aligned? I guess.
Yep. So you said forecast, but then you also are saying plan. Those two things are different. There's a sales plan and then there's a sales forecast.
Okay.
So from the sales plan standpoint, it's bottom up and top down. You say, hey, you need to do 50 million this year. Okay, fine. Here's 50 million. So where are you today in your sales process? Where are you today in your sales model? Here's my typical, and this is just the rudimentary. Here's my typical sales cycle. Do I have that data? Have I observed that data? How confident am I in that? Here's the time it takes. Here's the average selling price. Here's those things. And you work that model up and say, okay, in order to hit that 50 million, here's the capacity model I need to have, right? So you're saying 50, I'm saying this is the investment I need, okay? If you're saying 50, this is what we need to go do that. Now, and you go and execute to that. Now, forecasting is a little bit different. The board, first of all, I'm a big believer in undercommit, overperform, but it really comes down to then is, I'll go back to the other statement I made, shouting at the scoreboard does not change the score. It's what plays you run on the field that change the score. So when you roll up of your opportunities and working with your sales people, do they know what plays they're running on that field for those opportunities, and how comfortable are you with those plays? So, is this deal coming in? Well, it's going to come in this quarter. How do you know that? I work the movie backwards. Sorry, the only way I'm going to put that on my forecast is the customer says, yes, it's going to be there. So that's the level of confidence. I don't have that confidence, but they said it will be this quarter. Okay, what could happen? So you start breaking that down and you bucket them. So I'm a big believer in bucketing the forecast that says, here's my absolute must win. And why I'm confident with that is the plays have all been run, and these are the 4 or 5 attributes that I know are in place. The customer said this date. We're in charge of the sales process. We have not abdicated the sales process to the customer, which is another important one. We know how that sales process, the buying process is working inside the customer. We know how that is working. We have not abdicated it. We have not assumed the customer is going to manage that for us. These are the key things that are in there. It says, will this opportunity and how will this opportunity be in my forecast or not?
And then trickling down to the individual salesperson as you're setting those quotas, again, how often is there a disconnect, and then what should you do as a sales manager when I say disconnect between what the board is expecting and what the numbers that you're setting for your individual salespeople?
I look at the measurements. Do you have pipeline? Is the pipeline rich enough? Is the pipeline qualified enough to make that number? What's your win rate? And on an individual basis, you're looking at that salesperson in order to meet this number. Here are the things you need to place. You need to have this kind of win rate. I don't have that kind of win rate. I actually had one salesperson who's a B player and saw her misconception. So, I've got a pipeline, but Bob over there, his win rate is 30%. Mine's only 10%. I go, why is that? And she said, because he has only good qualified stuff in his pipeline. I said, yes. So, you're working on all these opportunities and you're telling me that some of these things aren't that well qualified. Why are you working on them?
Goes back to what you were saying in the beginning about activity, about where you're spending your time, right?
Where you're spending your time, it's one on the field, not shouting at the scoreboard. You can look at those numbers, but you break that down. It says, here's the reasons why. So I don't know if that answered your question, but you're looking at the sales folks. You got to make your number. Here are the reasons. Here are the key things you need to have in place to make your number. It's part of sales management. I believe it's part of my job as a leader to provide that environment in which they can make their number. That means also clearing out anything that's in the way of those three activities: closing, advancing, and prospecting. So getting rid of any other extraneous activities, which is always leakage happening with that. And then being able to sit them down and show them that they have to treat their business. Sales folks are treating their business as a book of business. And to meet your number, you have to have these three things in place. You have your pipeline in place. You can go do that. You've qualified your accounts, coaching them on that balance. Then there's your number. You know how to go and manage to it. So you manage to those criteria.
Yeah, there's an acronym that I just came up with for that so that I could personally remember that, which is CAP, right? Closing, advancing, and prospecting.
Yeah.
Some people will be, and as I'm sitting here, I'm learning as well, and I'm hoping others will too, as well as they listen to this. But obviously, there's a lot of people that I talk to that want to advance their career. They want to go from individual contributor to management. I think that those are good training wheels that you were just alluding to earlier, which is, you have a person who is underperforming because maybe sales management has mismanaged, so to speak, and they sort of do their own capacity. What do you say? Capacity
model.
Yeah, capacity model to really get an understanding of what they, if they were their manager, what they should do. I guess the question is that what advice do you have for people that want to transition from an individual contributor role into management, into leadership? Like, what are some of the things, speaking of mentors, I guess, what are some of the things that they should be doing, looking for, and all that to really try to get there?
So sales management is not the same as sales. And one of the things when people ask me that, or say, I do want to get in management, one of the things I'll ask them, are you willing to give up the way you sell? Because in getting to management, the first step in sales management is being able to coach. You got to give up the way you sell. The way you sell is your style. All right. You have to move from, and in coaching, it is not telling how to go do it. It is asking more questions. How do you know this is, so in my coaching, I always ask, how do you know that? How do you know that? I would sell a lot differently than that person. Fine. That's not the issue here. A big difficulty, and you hear it all the time, the classic, we took our best sales guy and made him a manager, and now he's neither.
Right.
Right. So, you really, if you're going to go in there, you're going to have to say, I'm willing to give up the way I sell. I'm really willing to give up the way I sell. I'm willing to be a coach. I'm willing to give that up and be able to take the people that are going to be working for me and coach them. That other part I said about, do you know your capacity model? That is what sales management is. If you can't do it yourself, how, by changing your title, are you magically going to know how to go do that? So those two things are very, very important. The willingness to give up how I sell, the way I sell, and being able to take a look at selling from a business side that says, I have a capacity model, I'm managing that business. Those two things are needed. It's a choice, and you have to be willing to do something different and give up something.
That makes sense.
Management.
Yep, that makes sense. I want to go. I had a follow-up question that I almost forgot to ask that I just want to go back to really quickly, which is, if you are looking at, you do your forecasting and you set a number of $50 million, whatever it might be, and you have a number of salespeople, let's call them 20 salespeople, 30 salespeople, and there's a small percentage of them, if any, that are actually hitting their individual number. What does that mean? Like, what should that tell either the salespeople that are on the team or the board? I mean, what does that mean?
Well, there's a law out there that says the square root of your sales guys, take the square root of them. Those are the ones that will be producing 80% of your number. And I have not seen that law broken yet. But what it means is that you have a stratification of your sales organization. And yep, there's the top 10% or so is carrying the bulk of the deals. In my experience, I have not seen anybody able to flatten that out as much, but there are those high performers. What does it mean? It means that you have a set of high performers that get it. It means that you have a set of, from sales manager, you have A players, B players, and C players. You got to manage the B players up, and you got to call the C players. And what I mean by call on them is, do they really want to be salespeople? This is a sales is a performance-driven professional organization. It's a profession. You pay for results. And what it says to me is that you got to constantly be looking at your organization and heavily supporting those A players, managing up the B players, and letting the C players know if they're going to be sales folks or not.
So if, let's say on a team, just to keep it simple, let's say on a team of 10, if you've got 2 people that have met their quota, exceeded their quota, and 8 people haven't, and let's say, for instance, and let's say, I don't know, let's say the rest of them, let's say the 8 of them that missed, let's say 50% of them only reached 70%, and then the rest, the remaining only reached 50%. Would that be?
Okay, that's a typical, all right, that's a typical model. That could be a typical model, yep.
Right, yeah, okay. And so as I'm talking to salespeople and somebody uses that as an excuse, I should dismiss that and say that's not a good excuse.
Yeah, well, it's not a good excuse.
In other words, most people aren't hitting their number, and so I'm just one of those people that haven't hit their number. The only reason that the 2 people that are hitting the number is because they've been around the longest, or they have the best accounts and all that stuff.
They weren't always that way. They got there for a reason.
Right.
They got there for a reason. Yeah. And you know, sales folks will. Yeah, in managing them, I love all sales folks, and you will hear all sorts of different things on the reasons why, and they're reasons, and those are excuses, and you got to bring them right back to yes, but I am accountable, you are accountable, and you're responsible for hitting your number. I will help you go do that. Let's go and understand why is it that you think this way. If you can't change that way you're thinking, maybe you shouldn't be a salesperson.
And you'll never get over quota that way. And
right.
Let's end it on that. Thank you, Marty. That was great.
It was enjoyable. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think I got a lot out of it, and I know if I got a lot of it, the people that are going to be listening will get a lot out of it as well. One other follow-up question that I have for you is if people want to learn more about you and learn more about what you have to say and the advice, maybe seek you out as a mentor at one point, how should they get in touch with you?
I'm on LinkedIn, and yes, I do mentor folks judiciously. You have to give me a reason why, but I can be reached on LinkedIn, and I'm very open to connections that way.
And you guys will see it on the podcast, but I'll spell it anyways in case you're in your car or on the go. It's Marty, Marty, Petraitis, Petraitas, and this has been Over Quota. Thank you, Marty.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody.